So, JJ, it's great connecting with you, and thank you again for joining us today. For those listening, JJ is a highly accomplished attorney with over 25 years of experience helping entrepreneurs, small business owners, and investors protect their assets and plan for the future. On Investor 101, we bring in top experts to share their stories, strategies, and lessons, and to empower and inspire our investor community. So, today we'll explore into your journey, dive into asset protection strategies, and gain insights into creating a strong legal foundation for success. So let's just start with your story. Can you share a bit about your background, what inspired you to focus on asset protection, and how your legal expertise has evolved over the few years?
Yeah, hey, or thanks so much for having me. I appreciate this opportunity. And, it's kind of interesting thinking back about my story. And really, I've been around real estate my entire life. And by when I say around real estate, everybody's been around real estate their whole lives. But I mean, in particular, real estate investing. And that's because my dad was and is an active real estate investor and developer. And I grew up around that. So even before I was born, he had had rental properties that he'd owned over the years, but he really kind of got into it a lot more, rather than just having maybe one or two properties. He got into it in a major way in the late 70s and early 80s. Is when he kind of first really got immersed in it to the point where that was a primary focus of all of his wealth building efforts. He built and developed automotive centers, so he would put in a business, say a transmission shop, and then he would have kind of that strip center that would also have a muffler man, a Jiffy Lube, things like that. And those were kind of his initial cookie cutter type of projects that he did. So he would build those up, get them up and going, and then he'd turn around and sell them. And, for years, he owned quite a few of those that helped pay for, our lifestyle. And he was the president of the Central Florida Real Estate Investors Association. They had a club there, and he was the president. And he would bring in speakers to, come speak to the group and talk about it. And as part of that, he would always take them around, show them around town, and he got to know a lot of those folks. And he decided, they would tell him, you should be a speaker like us, go around, teach people how to do what you're doing, because that's a lot of what he was doing at his investment club. Was he would start the meeting and say, okay, does anyone have any deals that they've done? And people would come up and talk about their deals, and he'd say, okay, well, here's one that I did recently. So he'd teach a little bit about the deal, the strategies that he employed to put that deal together, and how he was able to generate income and profits through that. So that's really how he first got started. And being around that, obviously, I did a lot of tagging along with him. So I would see a lot of things, meet a lot of the folks that he was working with. I'd work on some of his projects, to the best of my abilities, at least at the time. And really kind of developed an appreciation for this, that I thought, someday I want to be this major real estate developer. Was kind of what my long-term goal was. And I have done quite a bit of that. But through my exposure to the real estate and working with my dad, he would tell me, he'd say, you know what, you should be a lawyer. And, I'd have that a lot of times where people would tell me that. I mean, I don't know if I was argumentative or trying to be overly persuasive, but that was one of the things that people would always kind of say, you strike me as somebody that's going to be a lawyer. And that kind of just, resonated with me, and just I kind of let that marinate a little bit. And I finally decided when I was going through college, I thought, hey, I'm going to be, work with my dad. I'm going to do real estate. I'm going to go out and I work with him at his seminars and his training company. And part of it, I thought to myself, I was like, all right, but I'm coming right out of college. I don't have just the experience that I thought was necessary at the time. So I said, why would anybody listen to me? Even though I've had some experience, I need to develop a more of an expertise. So I decided to go to law school. And one of the things that was unique about my law school experience was that everything that I did through that journey was based upon where do I want to go ultimately. And not just I want to become a lawyer, but I want to become a lawyer that focuses on real estate, asset protection, taxes, estate planning, all the things that I do right now that I've done over the course of my career. Most people didn't know a lot about where they wanted to go with their legal degree. I did because of my dad. My dad would share those really kind of the insights with me and say, hey, here's what we really need you to be focused on, because he'd been working with lawyers over the years in a very small niche, because asset protection is not a large segment of lawyers. It's actually a pretty small niche. that you almost have to specialize in. And when I say specialize, I don't mean that like becoming a patent lawyer where you have to take a different bar exam or something like that. But, just really carving out that niche where we say, hey, I'm not suing anybody. I'm making sure that people, in the event that they do get sued, they've got their assets protected. I know that they're going to be facing, what I call the three legal pitfalls of lawsuits, income taxes, and death taxes. So everything that I do kind of focuses on asset protection, estate planning, and tax reduction. So that's probably more than you were looking for, but that kind of tells you what my story's been as far as how I got to where I am today. As this what sparked the interest and caused me to kind of tailor all of my education and training to make sure that I built a core understanding around the areas that my dad helped teach me were going to be important for the real estate industry.
Well, that's truly an amazing background, and your story is very inspiring, especially your dad. So thank you for sharing that. One of the most common questions we get from our investors is about using LLCs. Should every property be in its own LLC? And what do you typically recommend for structuring property ownership?
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. There are differing schools of thought. Some folks will tell you that you need a separate LLC for every property that you have. I don't necessarily agree with that. I can't argue with it and say that it's just inherently wrong because I don't know that I could say it's wrong by any means because if you want that type of level of protection, then that can be a great method of structuring yourself, is having a separate LLC. The challenge you have is that it can also be a costly method of protecting yourself. For instance, if you have that separate LLC, especially let's say that you're in California, for instance. Well, California imposes a $800 a year franchise tax on every entity that you have. So if you have 10 investment properties and you have 10 different LLCs, you're going to be paying $8,000 just in franchise taxes at an absolute minimum. It could even go up from there. But when we think about this, not only is it the $800, but it's also filing a separate tax return. Then it's having to keep separate books, having to do a lot of these things. Well, what we generally look at is what are we really protecting? People say, well, we're protecting the property. Not necessarily. The reality is, let's say that you buy a property. I'm just going to use, easy numbers just for illustration purposes. Let's say you buy a property for $100,000. Some people may be laughing saying, well, good luck finding a property for $100,000, but they're out there. So let's say you buy it for $100,000, you put 20% down and you borrow the 80% that's left over. So now your property is encumbered 80%. That 20% is your exposure. It's that equity that is exposed in the event of a lawsuit. Well, if that's all you have, obviously you would just have that one LLC. But let's say that your exposure is $20,000 there. Well, then you say, you know what? Turns out there's a property for sale right up the street. I'm going to buy that property too. Guess what? It's $100,000. I'm going to put 20% down, so $20,000. Now, if I have both of those, could I put those in the same entity? Well, what would that look like? Well, now I've got both of those eggs in one basket. So if something happens to my basket, I could lose both of those eggs. But how much am I losing? Well, 20,000 equity in the first one, 20,000 equity in the second one, total of $40,000. That may not be too bad of a situation, too bad of a deal, too much risk. Now, here's where, or what one of the things I share with people pretty regularly is that this is going to be something that sounds crazy. And I'm going to make the statement that I make and I'll see what you think about it. The lower your overall net worth, the more entities you may need. Now, I'll say it again. The lower your overall net worth, the more entities you may need. Now, the reason that sounds so crazy is that a lot of times people will say, well, wait a second, I thought I was going to wait to have all these entities until I was worth a lot of money. So, well, hold on a second. I don't know that that's the way to look at it. Because let's say that my total net worth in the entire world is $100,000. And I now have those two properties that make up part of that. So that's 40% of my overall 100,000 total net worth. Well, if I lost one of those properties, I lost 20,000 or 20% of my total net worth. That would be a pretty big hit. Well, if I lost 40% of my total net worth, that's an even bigger hit. So I need to make sure that I divide those things up into different legal entities in that instance versus, let's say I'm worth $1 million. If you're worth $1 million and you lose 40,000, you're still going to be okay. You're going to be upset, obviously, but at the end of the day, you're not going to have to cancel cable to make ends meet. You're still going to be okay. But if you lost 40%, that's going to be a much bigger hit. So that's how I explain to people, the lower your overall net worth, the more entities. And notice I said that you may need. Doesn't mean you will certainly need those. But the other thing is, what is your risk tolerance? Does it make sense to have them in all separate entities? The structure, which was the second part of your question, is how do we structure for the folks that we work with? And I look at it and I say, I generally like to set things up with a Wyoming holding company that will basically be kind of the parent company, if you will. And then we'll set up separate LLCs for the different properties, again, going through that same analysis, depending upon how much equity we have. If I'm able to put deals together with no money down, now I may start off with very little equity, but that's okay. When it comes to setting up my entities, I have a saying, and I probably say this at least once a day talking to clients, and it's don't go into it, grow into it. What I mean by don't go into it, grow into it is that someday you may need five, six, seven, 10 entities, but that doesn't mean that you get those entities set up right now. You get that initial structure with the holding company, and then maybe one entity that actually owns the property underneath a different legal entity, another LLC. And we generally set up that holding company in the state of Wyoming. And part of the reason for that is that it has anonymity, which is very nice as far as from a privacy standpoint. But then number two, the asset protection that it provides through their charging order protection, which is codified by statute there in Wyoming, is incredible. So it's one of the things that, and it's the exclusive remedy as far as if you sue an LLC, your exclusive remedy is a charging order, which gives us tremendous protection. So that's something that whenever I'm talking with folks, I take them through that process of saying, we've got to take a look at your overall, say the totality of your circumstances, because I need to know what is your overall net worth, what activities are you involved with, what type of exposure do you have. So we always refer people to a consultation call with us where we say, let us take a look at you and your unique circumstances because everybody's going to be a little bit different. We don't believe that there's such a thing as a one size fits all plan. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. Everyone's tax situation is going to be a little bit different. Their family situation is going to be a little bit different. So when we're implementing the LLCs and the other types of entities, we also think about the estate plan. So we've got to make sure that they've got an overall plan that addresses the three legal pitfalls of lawsuits, income taxes, and death taxes.
That was really, really insightful. Thank you for sharing that. And the examples were amazing. Really cleared up, and hopefully, for our followers seeing this, it really educated them. So speaking about strategies and all the examples you gave us, let's talk about the core elements of asset protection. From your perspective, what are the key pillars of a strong asset protection plan for real estate investors or even small business owners?
Well, really, kind of what, as I mentioned there, where I said the three legal pitfalls. I always start almost every presentation that I share with folks. I always start off and I say, when we talk about asset protection, we have to think, what are we protecting our assets from? And I always tell people that I believe that the government and other sources out there are attempting to place what I call a lid on wealth. And that lid is an acronym for those three legal pitfalls that I mentioned: lawsuits, income taxes, and death taxes. Those are the three things that if you don't have a plan to, adequately address them, you stand to lose everything that you've spent your entire lifetime accumulating. Well, obviously, we don't want that to happen. We spend far too much time, effort, energy, resources, and money building up our overall asset portfolio. We want to make sure we have protections in place. And those three key areas to overcome lawsuits, income taxes, and death taxes, I always focus on asset protection, estate planning, and tax reduction. So when someone contacts me or they want to speak with me or they have me come in and speak with their group, I always say, those are the threats. So now we address those threats through those areas of asset protection, estate planning, and tax reduction. So now we have to have a plan that accomplishes all of those three objectives. We've got to make sure that we protect ourselves from lawsuits. We've got to make sure that we minimize our income taxes as much as legally possible. And then we have to have a plan for how we're going to deal with those death taxes. And death taxes may not be estate taxes, it may be any fee that is imposed upon our estate, I view as a tax. So we've got to look at it from the standpoint of avoiding probate. So one of the things that we do with every one of our clients is we advise them to set up a revocable living trust to make sure that that will be the ultimate owner of their legal entities. So whenever they pass away, they're able to leave it to their family members. And we do it in a way that helps them to build generational wealth. We're not talking about just leaving everything to your family and having the potential that they may squander it. And we want to make sure that we have guardrails in place so that in the event that you pass away, you know that your family's taken care of, not just for the short term, but for the long haul.
Thank you for sharing that. And you spoke a lot about plans, and everyone needs a plan. I agree with you, but sometimes mistakes can happen. So let's explore that for a moment. What are some common mistakes you see investors make when it comes to asset protection, and how can they avoid them?
Okay, that's a great question because I tell people all the time is the single biggest mistake that I see people make is thinking that they don't need asset protection. So they'll think to themselves, well, you know what, I don't have enough. I'll wait until I've built up a serious amount of wealth. Well, I kind of look at them and I say, wait a second, when do you want to lose all of your money? Do you want to lose it now, or do you want to lose it on the way while you're thinking about it? Is that when you want to lose everything? Because it's never a good idea to have all of your assets at risk. And what most people don't understand is that your assets are at risk. It's not a matter of if you'll be sued, it's a matter of when, especially when you're involved in real estate. Now, that makes it sound like I'm opposed to real estate, and obviously by sharing my story, that's certainly not the case. So I always tell people we've got to make sure that we have that plan. Um, I like to think there's no such thing as a stupid question, but I think there are some that are what I'll call borderline. And one of the questions that I ask people all the time, I say, when is the time to have a plan? Before it's too late or after it's too late? Well, people kind of laugh sometimes and they say, I think that's blown right through the border. That's a bona fide stupid question. And I say, well, maybe so, but let me ask you a follow-up question. If we know that the answer to the question, when is the time to have a plan, before it's too late or after it's too late, and we say, well, of course it's before. Follow-up question is, okay, when do most people get burglar alarms? Sadly, it's after they've been burglarized. The reality is we need to get it in place before the negative events occur, rather than waiting until something really bad happened and then getting it set up. So the only time that we know that is before it's too late is by making sure that we get it set up right now. So if you're even remotely thinking about getting involved in real estate, you absolutely positively must consider setting up an asset protection plan, getting that initial LLC set up. Now, that's the single biggest mistake that I see people make. Second biggest mistake that I see people make is that they think they're doing the right thing, but they do it the wrong way. Well, if you do the right thing the wrong way, in essence, you've done the wrong thing. So we've got to make sure that we set it up the right way. Sometimes I think people mistakenly believe that all entities are the same, and that's not the case. Even if we said LLCs, if somebody told you, okay, you should set up an LLC, that doesn't really give you all the information that you need to know. Because as soon as you try to set up the LLC, there are going to be some questions. Is it a single member or is it a multi-member? Is it going to be member managed or is it going to be manager managed? Okay, what state is it going to be set up in? There are a lot of different considerations that must be, factored in so that we understand how our assets are going to be protected, how they are structured, so that we have the best protection plan in place possible. And that only happens by learning some of the considerations that you've got to go through and make sure that you have set this up the right way. And that's why I always tell people work with somebody who's a qualified professional, that this is what they do. There are some things that I believe can be a do-it-yourself project. I don't think legal affairs are a do-it-yourself project. I think you need to have qualified professionals that are working with you. And it's not just legal professionals working just with any lawyer, you need to work with a lawyer that is well versed and understands this particular area. Not only that, you need to have somebody that is a tax expert. And then we need to talk about maybe building retirement plans. You need to make sure somebody understands estate planning. So all of those things are ways that you can avoid making those mistakes. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to understand every minuscule detail of every legal matter or tax matter before you take action, but you need to work with someone that does understand that and then put your plan in place before rather than after.
I agree. And to show our audience how crucial, having asset protection is, can you share a memorable client success story where a strong asset protection plan saved them from significant financial or legal trouble?
Oh yeah, that's probably my favorite part of my job is that when I get those calls or those emails or even letters sometimes where people say, "I just want to say thank you," which you don't always get that as a lawyer, as you can imagine. So it's nice to get those letters when somebody says, "Hey, here's something that happened to me," and obviously I'm not going to give the specific details of who it was, but I have had people that say, "Here's what happened. I was involved in a dispute," which that's how all lawsuits are, started as a dispute. They even call it when you file a lawsuit, it's called filing a complaint. So when you file that complaint, it's because you had some sort of a dispute with somebody that something happened or you did something that caused potential damages. So you've got to have those damages. You've got to have some sort of a claim upon which relief can be granted in order to proceed with that lawsuit. Well, I have had countless people tell me over the years about having situations where they said, once I explained to the other party that I had an LLC, in particular, it was set up in a jurisdiction that had a charging order as the exclusive remedy. Then they went to an attorney to talk to them, and the attorney said, "Hey, we can't do anything. We're not going to be able to get this person's assets because they are set up the right way in the right jurisdiction." And everything was able to be avoided because they had it set up the right way. Especially that charging order. If you're finding an attorney that understands the charging order as that exclusive remedy, they explain to their clients that, hey, you're not going to get anything. And because you're not going to get anything, how about you settle this case? Or how about you just let it go? That's what I really like. I get probably more people that will say, hey, we were able to settle this for significantly less. Even when they may have had potential liability there, they were able to settle it. Now, one of the things that I also do, or is I have a master's law degree in dispute resolution. And when we talk about dispute resolution, that's things such as negotiation, mediation, arbitration. So you've got these clauses that you're able to put in. I had one client that I worked with over the years that, I mean, he thought he was absolutely just going to be wiped out. But it turned out in his documentation, there was an arbitration agreement clause. So, an arbitration clause that said any disputes as a result of this, the parties agree not to enter litigation and must first go through an arbitration process. Because he had that arbitration clause in his documentation, he was able to avoid that litigation, and it saved him literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, because this particular client had significant holdings. So when you look at that and you think about, as I mentioned, negotiation, mediation, arbitration. What I like is to have clauses that say any disputes shall be resolved via a three-step process before litigation may ensue. First, the parties agree to attempt to negotiate the matter between themselves. If they're not able to negotiate it to a resolution acceptable to both parties, now it must go through mediation. And then we can have a mediator brought in to try to work between the two parties and come up with some sort of a acceptable resolution. And then it says, if we don't do that, then we go to arbitration. Now, what most people don't recognize when it comes to arbitration is that there are different sets of rules for arbitration. It could be that we're going to follow the American Arbitration Association rules. It could be that we're following the JAMS rules of arbitration. And then even within those two, there can be, we're going to follow the expedited rules, or we're going to follow the rules for construction. We're going to follow rules for this particular industry. There are a lot of intricate nuances that most people are unaware of. Fact is, I would even go as far as to say many, if not most, attorneys are unaware of the intricate nuances that come in with dispute resolution, as evidenced by the fact that, getting a master's law degree focused just on the area of dispute resolution and conflict management. When you're going through that intense, you learn a lot of things that you just didn't learn in law school or in your practice in general.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And it shows that there's really a big value of being prepared, in this industry. So on to our next question. How do you see the field of asset protection and estate planning evolving in the next decade, especially now, there's a new president, things are changing. And what advice would you give to investors preparing for these changes?
That's a good question. As far as, obviously none of us has a crystal ball to see what's definitely going to happen, but my perspective on things and kind of my prognostication, if you will, is that I think we're going to have a more business-friendly environment with President Trump going into his uh, next term. I think the attitude uh, towards President Trump and his incoming administration is far different than it was last time. And whether you like President Trump, whether you don't like President Trump, the reality is he's going to be President Trump. So we've got to understand that there's a new administration, there are new rules, whether you like it or not. How is that going to impact you? I do think it's going to be a much more business friendly environment, which typically means lower taxes. It means probably more um, landlord friendly laws. And I know a lot of those that's state, but I think some of this is kind of filtered down where it's kind of we've got a lot of people that are saying, hey, the sentiment of the people is not going to be as lawsuit friendly. It's going to be in favoring litigation as much. So I think we're going to hopefully see a little less litigation, which sounds a little strange, thinking that President Trump's probably the most litigious president we've ever had. Um, but at the same time, he's going to be more business friendly. Then I think taxes are going to be a little more friendly and a little more favorable for real estate investors. One of the things that I see is being a lot of the future is going to be the AI. That's just something anybody that says, yeah, I've heard about AI, but I just don't know very much about it. I would caution you. I'd say you better learn a little bit about it because that's what's coming. That's what the future is going to be. And a lot of these things that, especially real estate investing, automation of how you find properties, how you make offers on properties, and how you can streamline processes through the use of AI can be absolutely incredible. Not only that, but I do think that we're going to see, um, just more things that AI is going to be generating that we don't even know about yet. We don't even, sometimes it's hard to even wrap your head around how these changes are going to really come into play because one thing that I will say that humans are very innovative. And when we come up for ideas of how do I want AI to help me, we may not even know some of those now, but as we start integrating it, we'll see, wow, it helped me a lot here. What if I take it and put it over here? How could we then use it? So I think we're going to see things that we don't even know about right now, and it's going to be happening on a very rapid basis. So I think that's what I'd be on the lookout for.
Well, that's a great perspective. Love how passionate you are in your industry and everything that you do. So to wrap up things, let's give our audience something that they can take away and act on. What's one book, tool, or piece of advice that's profoundly impacted the way you approach your career? And a personal question for me, I heard that you study negotiation. Do you have a negotiation tip or an example that you'd like to give us?
Yeah, as far as so the first thing, as far as maybe, what is the tip that I would tell people to do? I would say schedule a time to talk with somebody that can be of assistance to you. And when I say of assistance, that can maybe help get you on that path to asset protection, to paying less in taxes, to getting an estate plan put in place. That's part of what we do at Advanced Tax Group is we work with people on a regular basis, making sure that they have access to strategies and structures that can put more money in their pocket, that can help build wealth for the future. And we offer a consultation, that we always want to meet with people, and there's no obligation here. Basically, if you just said, hey, I'd like to talk to somebody and find out how I might be able to implement asset protection strategies into my business and into my life, we're able to help them do that. And then they at least have something to think about. Whether they decide to work with us or whether they work with somebody else or they try to do it themselves, that's fine. But we always offer that consultation. And from a negotiation standpoint, what I always advise people is I think there is a misunderstanding. People typically, when they think about negotiation, they think about it as a competition. And when we say a competition, it's kind of like, hey, I'm going to win, which means you're going to lose. Well, that's not really how negotiation works. I look at it and I say, no, the reality is it's not competition, it's collaboration. And one of the best real estate lessons I ever learned is my dad taught me, he said, you know what we're doing here is we're not trying to find good deals, we're trying to find problems that need solutions. And that's what negotiation is all about. You find somebody that is in a predicament that, and it doesn't mean that we've got them over a barrel. It just means, hey, they don't want this property, or they'd like to get out of this property, or they'd like to somehow change situations. How can we come up with ideas for helping them to accomplish their objectives? And if we're able to work with them and collaborate with them and come up with new ideas, now we're able to help them accomplish their objectives, which in effect helps us accomplish our objectives, which is always to generate profits and build wealth for ourselves.
I love that. It's not a competition, it's collaboration. That's amazing. So JJ, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and insights with us today. I'm sure our audience has gained a wealth of knowledge from this conversation. Before we wrap up, how can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your services? I know you spoke about a little bit about that, but if you can, say the website or social media or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. The best way is just send an email to info@advancedtaxgroup.com. Again, that's info@advancedtaxgroup.com. And just say, hey, I saw JJ on the show, the Investor One-on-One with motivatedsellers.com, and I was amazed. I was blown away. We loved what he had to say. I'd like to learn a little bit more. Just send us an email and say, hey, I'd like to find out how to protect my assets, plan my estate, and most importantly, reduce my taxes.
For sure. Thank you, JJ.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.